Mahanla Moonlings, hi, how are you? I just felt like making a video today. It's not planned. I just, was feeling good. If any of you have anxiety or depression and you understand, if you have a good day, you clasp onto it and you just do as much as possible. I'm going to do so many things today. I've already got like so much done and I have more to do. I find if I have the energy, stockpile on the work, because there's going to be days where I'm not going to be able to work. So today I want to talk about one of my favorite topics of all time. And this is the crazy bit because I, for some reason, haven't really talked about this on my channel. I've mentioned that I love books before. I'm sure at least once I've mentioned that I love books. And if you follow me on my blog, you know that I talk about books there all the time. I do reviews. I try to read indie authors. So yeah, I want to talk about 3 books I read last year and why I loved them so much. One of them was a reread, one of them was a gift, and the third one was one that was also a gift, but I did actually want to read something about that topic, so it worked out really well. So we're going to start with the reread. So it's a bit of background where I came across this book. I am a trained anthropologist. I say that all the time, but I genuinely am. I have an undergrad and Bachelor of Arts in Anthropology and English and a Master's in Anthropology and Development. And I'm currently doing a PhD, which involves a blending of business management and anthropology. So, I am in practice as well. And I've always been a big fan of anthropological studies. And there's a lot to be said. Apparently, anthropologists make some of the best storytellers. So someday when I get around to writing that book, it's going to be epic, I promise. Also, there probably won't be much cuts in this video. I'm kind of just going to go for it, like I said, I was feeling good, so we're just going to make hay while the sun shines all day long. Sorry. Okay, books. I'm just going to go get the books because I have them in person. Now, I read like 50 books last year, and I loved loads of them. Some of honorable mentions would be both of Margaret Atwood's books, The Handmaid's Tale and The Testaments. I was very lucky that, I started reading The Handmaid's Tale, not when it was written and then had to wait for the sequel. That's hilarious. I also read a couple of horrors. I made it a point of trying to read horrors by female authors because, I do read a lot of Stephen King and I read a lot of H.P. Lovecraft and I read a lot of... I talk very fast, I'm sorry. Oh my God. But I also wanted to try and read some horrors by women, and I read The Hunger by Alma Katsu, and that was, well, I listened to it on audiobook. Sorry about that, bit of a cold. I listened to it on audiobook, and actually it was really good. It was genuinely like frightening, and there wasn't like that outright horror that you get where you're just like, ooh, monster thing. It was all like, it was like the psychological aspect of it as well. Really enjoyed that. Now I did listen to Broken Monsters on audiobook as well. I'm trying to remember who wrote that. My brain has deleted the name. It'll come back. Laura Burke, maybe. And the story itself was wonderful, but my problem was with the narrator. The narrator, I didn't like the narrator. And look, that's maybe a just opinion, but I found that she did this annoying thing where if she was a teenage girl, she would like talk like this, like as if all teenage girls sounded like that, and all the guy characters sounded like this. And I understand like it's harder maybe for women to do men characters, but like you don't have to give voices to them. You can just narrate. Anyway, we come back around now to the books that I'm actually going to talk about today. And number 1 is this wonderful book that I've had for many, many years. I read it first when I was 17 years old in college, for my first year of college in anthropology. It's called The Forest People by Colin Turnbull. And when I read it, look at I used to put my name inside books. Oh my God, I was so cute. I was 17, okay? This book is absolutely beautifully written, beautifully researched, and it is one of those anthropology books that isn't actually an anthropology book. So what I mean by that is there's a lot of anthropologists that go out and they study with people, and it's called participant observation or ethnography or whatever way you want to look at it, and you actually immerse yourself in the culture, and you actually become friends with the people. You actually, even some people get honorary titles, some people get some people, it's called going native sometimes. That's a bit further down the other end, but you genuinely get a sense of who these people are. And it still happens to this, like in modern day, people do long-term, like long-scale ethnographic investigations. But the thing about Colin Turnbull is that he was doing it just out of pure and sheer interest in these people. He was a traveler by nature. He was kind of one of those people that would really just enjoy, traveling and meeting people, and that's why it was wonderful. It was written before he became an anthropologist, really. And the great thing about that is that he it wasn't tainted by anthropological concepts, and there's an argument to be made that sometimes, especially if you're going to study someone like a culture. So I'll just give a quick background. These are the forest people. They're the Mbuti of the Ituri forests in Africa. And obviously they are so different to you or I, unless you're an Mbuti, hello. They live their lives in the forest. They have a completely different religion to us, different social structures, family structures. They're matrilineal rather than being patrilineal. And so when you're coming at a culture who's so different to you, it's interesting for someone like Turnbull to not force it into anthropological paradigms. And what I mean by paradigms is, philosophies and, systems of categorization. He really just presents it like it was a story. And I think that was one of the best books that we could have been given as young anthropologists, to explain that, like, you don't have to categorize people. In fact, they'll probably do it for you themselves, even inadvertently. And it remains one of my favorite books of all time. I've read it about 4 times. And the first time, I'm not sure I really understood that. I was 17. I was enthralled by the world of anthropology, mostly by, the anthropology of food, which I'm still hugely invested in. But yeah, his description of the people, I think it's as kind and as fair as it could be to people. You can portray people very unfairly, especially if they're coming from somewhere like the forest of the Ituri forest, and they can't, really defend themselves because they're not in our world. They're not in our, they have their own world. So you could arguably portray someone in an unfair light, but I don't think that's how this book turned out. I really do think it's a classic book. I'll even just read you here, Colin Turnbull is now retired. He's held a number of teaching posts in anthropology, but this fieldwork took place before his anthropological training. And he was ordained in India as a full Buddhist monk by the Dalai Lama in 1992, although his first contact with the Tibetan Buddhism was back in 1949. And he's written a number of books, including The Lonely African, The Mountain People, Tibet, and The Human Cycle. Now, I haven't actually read any of those. They are on my list. But I just wanted to make you aware of this book. I'm sure you would be able to get it, especially if you are coming to this channel from America. He's an American anthropologist. You can probably get him in most good bookshops. Online, I'm sure they do. I'm sure you can get them on Kindle now, and also you could probably get a secondhand one in a charity shop, because it's one of those books that is probably, this is not its first run. This is it was first printed in 1961, and this edition is from 1993. And I believe there was another edition more recently. This is the 1993 version. And there is a few acknowledgements, and there's an introduction by Colin Turnbull in 1993 as well. So yeah, look, this book for me is one of those rare 5 out of 5s, engaging, beautifully written, and giving you a perspective of people that you would possibly never, very few of us will ever meet any of these people, but to actually, give us an insight into these people, and it'll actually tie in with my next book, and I'll explain why. But for me, it's so important for us to read about different cultures, and the ones as far away from us as possible, the better. It even says here, at Africa's inhospitable heart, in the Ituri forest in northeastern Zara, live the Pygmies, a legendary people. They were mentioned by Homer, Aristotle, and the ancient Egyptians. So they've been around, okay? They've been around. So I could talk about this book forever, but I'm going to put it away now, and we'll move on to book number 2. So this one was a gift from Lebu, from Gavin, and he gets me. Gavin really does. He's one of the first men that I ever dated that really understood me. And it's called Against Empathy by Paul Bloom, The Case for Rational Compassion. So I am extremely empathetic, and for years I did not realize that, in fact, my empathy was so strong that I took on the emotions and pain of other people. And while that makes me, I think it's an excellent gift to have empathy, because I can see things from lots of people's perspective. That whole I think it was Socrates that said it's a good mind to be able to hold someone else's opinion but not necessarily agree with it. So it means that you can actually see from their side, but it doesn't mean necessarily you have to take on their opinion. This book it's quite technical in some cases, but I mean, there's also parts where he just talks about, Charles Dickens. He talks about, doing good versus, so there's a bit in it about as well, colonialism. And as you can imagine, the Europeans during colonial times, many of them just wanted money and, natural resources and the like. But some of them genuinely believed that they were doing good. They were going and civilizing Africans, Indians, Asians in general, and they believed that they were bringing their religion and culture to them, and they were making them better. So there's an element of that in it. Sorry, doorbell. So this he makes a case that he says, I am against empathy, and one of the goals of this book is to persuade you to be against empathy too. And this does seem like a radical, idea, when, especially for someone like me who thinks that the world isn't empathetic enough. What he's trying to say is that sometimes empathy can be our undoing. And while I do agree with him, this is the interesting thing. I was able to read this book, and I did agree with some things he said. I didn't agree with everything. So he argues that, say, for example, when something horrible happens, he's coming from an American perspective. So he was talking about school shootings. And obviously when that happens, we all feel horrible. Well, most of us feel horrible. We, if we don't have children, we still feel awful. But if we do have children, we worry about our children going to school. We worry about maybe even them having that feeling and becoming a school shooter someday. And what he is arguing is that while those feelings are valid, that they end up causing outrage, they cause anger, they cause further riots even sometimes. And what he is trying to argue is that, yes, empathy is important, but when something like that happens, we should resist the urge, our first urge, what we feel first, because that is our, I suppose, what we would call your lizard brain, but your id reaction. And what we should do, in fact, is come at it logically, come at it with our hearts opened and with compassion, but also to realize that it's important to rationally make the next move and not do it emotionally. And I think that's something we can all learn from. Now, like I said, I don't agree with everything he says. He says that no, in fact, politics is not attached to empathy, but in my opinion, I think it is. In certain cases, like for example, the right could argue that because I'm pro-choice, that would make me less empathetic, but where in fact I am thinking about the woman and her life and even the life of the child. Radical views, it's okay to have your own, but I do think that this is an interesting look at empathy, especially in a world that we're all saying we should have more, and I still do think we should have more empathy. While this is well argued, brilliantly argued, I feel that maybe, just maybe, we're not quite at this point yet. I think we need to understand empathy better first before we can say, okay, now we need to take a step back, because there's too much we see in our daily lives that could be cured with a bit of empathy, I think. I argue about people who are angry when they're driving. And I don't know if there's many of you who drive, but if you're driving in traffic and people are cutting you up, or, they're angry and they're aggressive. And I think that's from a lack of empathy. And it's also from a lack of their own emotional well-being and understanding. They don't have a good connection with their own emotions. But for me, it's also because if that happened to them, they'd be mad. So why are they doing it to others? So there's this connection where they have the emotion, but they don't have the empathy. So the emotion is that they can feel the emotion of anger, of being cut up, or someone being aggressive towards them. But then they can't turn that around and say, okay, I shouldn't do that. I shouldn't do that also, because that would make the other person angry. That would make me angry. So therefore it must make the other person angry. So yes, Against Empathy by Paul Bloom. Thank you, Lebu. The next book is also one he bought me, but it's a weird one, but it's actually one of my favorite books I've ever read. I've only read this one once. I think it's only a once read. The reason I still have it, I normally give books away once I read them, is because Lebu wants to read it, but he is not as fast at reading as I am. But we still stand Lebu. He tries. Okay, so that's that one. And last but not least, last Christmas, my darling Lebu bought me a book about dirt. I love saying that to people. And people are like, what did Gavin get you for Christmas? Oh, he got me a book about dirt. And they were like, oh. I was like, no, it's a good thing. It's called Dirt to Soil, One Family's Journey into Regenerative Agriculture. Sorry, that was Regenerative Agriculture by a gentleman called Gabe Brown. And when I got this book, I knew nothing about it. He, in fact, had gotten the idea off an Instagram page or something. And people were touting this book as one of the best books to read if you're interested in agriculture, if you're interested in food, if you're interested in modern agricultural practices, which I very much am. I am studying farmers and their networks of knowledge. And when I was worried reading this book would be tough because, there is quite a bit of chemistry in it. There's quite a bit of biology in it and science in general, but it's absolutely attainable for anyone. It's you can read this and you don't have to have a PhD in chemistry or biology. And in fact, the way it's written about Gabe Brown's family, and they own a farm, and it's absolutely wonderfully intertwined with the chemistry and the science, and then the family's decades of farming. So like this guy, basically he lived in the city. He was born in the city. He didn't know anything about farming, but he just got it in his head. He wanted to move and have a life on a farm. And he had met this lady, and I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, because I did read this last January, so this time last year. But basically, he met this lady whose family had a farm, and they were actually kind of nervous about selling the part of their farm to this guy, because not because he wasn't a nice guy or that he didn't care about his wife, they didn't care about their daughter, but because he genuinely had absolutely no background in farming. And he was talking about these radical, now I'll explain radical in a moment, because it's actually not radical, ideas of farming. But they did give him the farm, and now he is a successful farmer, and he has worked with nature. He doesn't need chemicals to protect his plants. He doesn't need fertilizer. Like, he just uses natural fertilizer. He doesn't need chemical based. All fertilizers are chemical based, but ones that are produced en masse. He actually has everything he needs in and within his farm. So he basically approached the farm the way you would approach a natural environment. And it's such a wonderful book, because for someone like me who is interested in agriculture, and I'm interested in, how do we help farmers, improve their soil, improve their, animal health, improve their, even just their yields, their yields for their whatever crop that they're growing. And there's so much in this book, and it's quite short, actually. Well, for me, this is a short book. It's 201 pages long, and it's got everything in it, from why you need predatory insects on your farm, to the fact that our soil is so porous now that, when it rains, we don't actually get the water. It doesn't stay in the soil when it should, and it doesn't drain the way it should. It actually sits on top. He talks about the chemical makeup of the soil, that, we have to leave soil fallow, but in fact, it doesn't really work, because leaving it fallow basically just means letting nature back at it. And what he has adopted is quite an eclectic way of allowing the soil to regenerate by giving it what it needs, in the sense of, like, the chickens are let out and they eat insects, but they also, leave their droppings, and that becomes part of the soil. And, and he actually is approaching it the way our ancestors, 10,000 years ago, just before the dawn of agriculture, they weren't planting plants. They weren't technically engaging in agriculture, but what they were doing was they were cultivating already existing plants. So if there was an area of land where they knew corn would grow, they would basically look after that area of land, and they would help and come back every year. They wouldn't over harvest it. They wouldn't cut it down. They wanted the corn, and they wanted it to come back every year so they could get it. But they also let nature take its course, which, that was before they understood how that they could plant something and it would grow. But this is such a wonderful book. It's probably, like, I love those books. I love The Forest People, and I really enjoyed Against Empathy. But I think this was one of my favorite, if not my favorite book I read last year, because it's so connected to what I'm interested in. It's from a family's perspective. It addresses so much. It addresses, I can just read you some of the chapters, like, rethinking our livestock focus. So how they, manage their livestock. The 5 principles of soil health. That was really, really interesting. And even he says here, the main things that are, he talks about in this books are limited disturbance. So he limits the mechanical, chemical, and physical disturbances of the soil, which is, as I was saying earlier, the fertilizer, moving the soil, or big harvesting machines, and sort of tillaging. He doesn't go for tillaging. He says it destroys the soil. The armor, so that's keeping the soil covered at all times. So this is really interesting. So I'm sure all of us have seen, or if we don't come from a country that farms, at certain times of the year, farms are just, the fields are literally empty and the soil is just bare. It's just it's just out there on its own. And he's saying that bare soil is wrong, it's an anomaly, and that it needs a natural coat of armor to protect the soil from wind and water erosion. So how do you do that? Well, diversity. You need to have a diversity of plant and animal species. And this was really like a scary thing that I learned from this book, is that, and I didn't know this, and I someone who is interested in agriculture and food, that we only have a few species of corn left, where, even 100 years ago, we would have had hundreds of species of corn, and before that even more, because we are only cultivating the same one, and we've made our own version, and it's not as healthy because it doesn't have the diversity that it needs. And it's the same thing I've been saying for a long time, maybe not on this channel, but in my life, is that it's okay if a carrot is wonky. Living roots. So let the roots live, basically. Don't pull up the roots. That kind of makes sense. Roots are not only something that will make the plant grow again, even if they fail to grow and they die, the roots become part of the soil, become part of the regenerative process. Got it. This is biology, in turn fuels the nutrient cycle that feeds the plants. So he used to think that only mid-May and to mid-September was their 120 days of growing season. But now he realizes that all year round is growing season, just some of it is for the stuff you can harvest and eat. And then integrate animals. He says it doesn't matter if you are, talking about not even having a full herd, but nature does not function without animals, and that makes sense when you think about it. They eat. So say for example, it's a cow. Cows eat grass. They walk on the grass, thereby squashing it down, which gives the armor we were speaking about earlier and protects the soil. They leave their droppings, which becomes part of the fertilizer, the natural fertilizer, and then they eat the grass as well, but they don't eat all the way down to the roots, because even animals know that you don't eat all the way down to the roots. So he says here, the major benefit is that the grazing of plants stimulates the plants to pump more carbon into the soil. So we need carbon. That's how we are carbon-based life forms. And it has a major positive impact on climate change by cycling more carbon out of the atmosphere and putting it into the soil. So when we talk about, we think, carbon dioxide, we obviously need trees for that. But in fact, most green things use carbon dioxide as part of their energy cycle. We use oxygen, they use carbon dioxide. So if you want a healthy functioning ecosystem on your farm or ranch, you must provide a home and habitat for not only farm animals, but also pollinators, predatory insects, earthworms, and all of the microbiology that drives ecosystem function. And these five, so you've got your the 5 things that he talks about in this book, and he comes back to over and over again, is limited disturbance, armor, diversity, living roots, and integration of animals. And he doesn't necessarily just do 5 chapters on that. Every chapter talks about those. It's a whole cycle. It's this circle of life. So I highly recommend this book. Even if you're not a farmer, even if you're not into agriculture, because I've spoke about it in my last video. Our climate is changing. Our time is running out, and we do need people more aware of what is harmful in agriculture and what is helpful. And we can't stop agriculture, or people will starve. Agriculture is necessary to feed the world, but there are other ways to do it, and who else to teach us but Mother Nature? So that was a really long video. It's like half an hour long. I'm so sorry that this video is so long. Oh, look at my little tattoo. Don't worry. Subscribe to Unis Annis. But I hope you enjoyed it. If you guys like me talking about books and you want to hear more about books, please leave me a comment below. these books weren't necessarily written in 2019. I just read them in 2019. Obviously, one of them was written in 1961. But please comment below your favorite book from last year or your favorite book of all time. I'm definitely going to do a video on my favorite books of all time because I have so many. And yeah, thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe if you're not subscribed already. Leave a like, a comment. Okay, yeah, thank you and goodbye. Bye, Marlies. Bye.